What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingen. I am joined today by Michael Agello and Jim Parsons of the Hockey News, coming at you to talk about all of the latest and greatest news from around the NHL in bite-sized storylines. But before we get into all of it today, do want to remind you that for over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com and get in on the action. All right. Well, we got some news this morning, you guys. The Seattle Kraken have hired former Vancouver Canucks GM Patrik Allvin as their assistant GM and VP of hockey ops. So Allvin, of course, spent 4.5 seasons as GM of the Canucks. He was a finalist for GM of the Year as recently as 2024. Obviously, things did not end on the most positive note in Vancouver with where their franchise is currently. But Mike, what do you think of this hire for Seattle? I mean, with the way that Allvin's tenure ended with Vancouver, are you surprised to see him back in a front office in this position already, especially when you got guys like Tom Fitzgerald still out there without a job right now?
I'm a little surprised, but we seem to see around the league that, there's reclamation projects and somebody with experience underneath him to maybe whisper in their ear, this is what I would do, so don't do it. Like Rob Blake in Los Angeles, he made a lot of bad moves that didn't prevent the Nashville Predators from bringing him in under Chris McFarland. I think that's the case here with Jason Botterill as the Seattle GM. He's bringing in somebody who has some experience. Maybe not the greatest experience, but it's always better to have two opinions instead of one. If that's the case, then Brad Treliving will be getting a job probably as a VP of hockey operations someplace pretty soon. And I think Stan Bowman could use some help in Edmonton, but maybe he makes all the wrong moves already. So there you go.
Well, already a knock on Edmonton. We got Jim here as our guest, and you took less than 5 minutes to get there. All right, we're coming out guns blazing today here on the Wraparound. Jim, Edmonton jokes aside, and we will get to Edmonton later on in the show because we got a lot to talk about today. What do you think of this move for Seattle? Do you think it's a good hire?
Well, Michael's not the only one taking shots at Stan Bowman these days. Let's put it that way. But as far as Patrik Allvin goes, to me, he was never really the GM in Vancouver. I mean, that was his title, but everybody knows that Rutherford was calling the shots there. So I think in Seattle, it's probably hard to know what Allvin actually will do. He's maybe one of the few guys that would have been really open to an assistant GM role. So it makes sense to me that he would land somewhere in that capacity because, let's be honest, it's probably what he was in Vancouver. What I would wonder is maybe how those conversations went. Like, did Allvin say, look, there was a lot of stuff I wanted to do in Vancouver, I didn't get the chance to do in Vancouver. And maybe Seattle liked that sort of conversation and felt like, hey, this is a guy who feels like he needs to redeem himself, who feels like he could be a part of this team, is fine being, a second fiddle, second player, part of a group in Seattle. The pieces seem to fit for me. Now, I don't really know what to say about Allvin and what he's going to be able to do because I have no idea what moves in Vancouver were actually his to call. Rutherford said it was Allvin that made a lot of these choices, but I don't believe that for a second. So it's really hard to know if he's actually the man responsible for some of the things that happened in Vancouver, or if he was just kind of going, I guess they don't really have much choice here. So maybe as part of a group and ensemble cast in Seattle, he'll be much better suited there. But it makes sense to me that he would get another shot to kind of prove himself and suggest, what you saw in Vancouver is not necessarily what I'm capable of doing.
Well, we'll see what happens there in Seattle. At least he doesn't have to go far, just Vancouver to Seattle. Not a long trip there. But of course, we've already got the Stanley Cup final still going on right now. We've got Game 5 tonight in Carolina. The series is tied. Jackson Blake, I think, has been a pretty remarkable success story for the Carolina Hurricanes throughout his career, his young career, and also these playoffs specifically. So he was a 4th round pick, 109th overall back in 2021. He went from 34 points in his rookie year to 53 points this season. He's now tied with Taylor Hall for the team lead in scoring. So he leads all forwards in the playoffs in scoring chances and high danger chances. I mean, this pickup for Carolina is looking like an absolute steal of a draft pick with Jackson Blake. So, Mike, what have you thought of his breakout this year in the regular season, but also especially in these playoffs?
Well, that line with Blake, Stankoven, and Hall, I think, has been the key to the Hurricanes getting as far as they have. Him individually, I mean, yes, he's a 4th-round pick. He's a sort of undersized player, very reminiscent of his dad, Jason, who played in the NHL for a long time with the Islanders and the Leafs and a few other teams. But I mean, I think the smart thing here is the recognition of his talent by the Hurricanes and by GM Eric Tulsky. They got him on an 8-year contract that doesn't start until next year. He scored 53 points, as you mentioned, and his cap hit is $5.1 million. I mean, that contract, if is going to age very well for the Hurricanes. And that's, situations where they've gotten Stankoven locked up long-term. They've gotten Jackson Blake locked up long-term. That's where, the judgment of Eric Tulsky is showing, and Blake is taking advantage. They recognized how good a player he is, and he's taking advantage of that in Carolina and getting really good opportunity. And he looks like not a star, but he's going to be a very good player for a long time.
Yeah, you mentioned his line with Stankoven and with Hall, and that line, the depth, the bottom 6 depth in general in Carolina has been crucial to their success in these playoffs. Jim, obviously, like Mike said, this is a huge benefit to have them or to have Blake locked up on this long-term deal. I mean, how do you see him progressing with the Hurricanes? I mean, obviously he's going to be there long-term, and do you think he grows into maybe more of a top 6 kind of role, or do you think that he's well suited where he is right now?
Yeah, I wouldn't put anything past him, really. I mean, this is an interesting guy because, he was drafted late. He signed a contract, a deferred contract, which is pretty rare in the NHL, right? So he's already taking a unique perspective to his career. And when you look at his dad, who really made a career out of probably more than people anticipated he would do, I think this is a kid who probably follows in the same footsteps, who, nobody's going to tell him he can't. He's the kind of guy who's like, look, this is an opportunity. I'm going to grab it. Carolina was smart to do it the way that they did it. He's taking and seizing an opportunity here, especially with a lot of the guys in Carolina who are supposed to be their main scorers, not really stepping up and doing that in this playoffs. So he's seizing an opportunity, and I think he'll do that throughout the rest of his career. So if those opportunities are offered to him, I think he's the kind of kid who's going to be able to grab that. Now, what his ceiling is, I don't really know. Don't know enough about him, haven't watched enough about him except for this season, especially in the playoffs, to know exactly what kind of player he's going to turn into. But I don't put anything past somebody with his kind of drive and mentality and the way he's approached his career. That deferred contract thing, especially like Carolina seems to do that, right? I think Jarvis did it too, right? So it's one of those things where these guys, they think differently. And I think that's a big deal for Carolina. And moving forward, I think it's going to continue to be a storyline.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we'll see what happens for Carolina this year. Like I said, game 5 tonight in Raleigh to see who takes the lead there. And obviously Carolina is going to be relying on Jackson Blake and that line quite a bit to help in their scoring attack. We talked about Patrik Allvin earlier going from Vancouver to Seattle, but going back to Vancouver for a second, Jake DeBrusk is reportedly drawing the interest of the Ottawa Senators. So DeBrusk is 29 years old. He's got 5 years left on his current contract. He's got a $5.5 million cap hit. He had 23 goals and 19 assists last season, so 42 points in 81 games. Do you see DeBrusk as a fit in Ottawa, Mike? Because, when we were talking about Allvin and how his tenure ended in Vancouver, could see a lot of change, could see a lot of moving parts here with the Vancouver Canucks. But with DeBrusk, obviously with that contract, do you see him fitting in Ottawa? And what do you think it would take if a trade were to happen to get him?
Well, I think it's a fit with Ottawa because I think Steve Staios recognized at the end of the year, and he couldn't really address it at the deadline when they tried to add guys like David Perron and, I think Warren Fogle was one of the additions that, they needed scoring depth. And, you could do worse than a 5-time 20-goal scorer. I mean, DeBrusk had a lot of success in the Atlantic Division with the Boston Bruins. He was a leaf killer in the playoffs. It hasn't worked out as well in Vancouver. The cap hit is $5.5 million, which with the cap going up to $104 million is a bargain. If you can get 20 to 25 goals out of him, it's great. As for what they would give up, I mean, I don't think Vancouver is going to give him away, but right now the Canucks are in a situation where the last guy in the room turn off the light because we've heard rumors about Besser, we've heard rumors about Elias Pettersson. It's like it's a mass exodus. Connor Garland. I mean, who is going to be left on this team? You can't strip it all the way down to the studs, but they seem like they're going to. So, whoever and whatever they get will probably be futures for DeBrusk.
Yeah, Jim, if you look at DeBrusk, whether he's traded to Ottawa or anywhere else for that matter, do you agree that it would be mostly futures to get him? And what do you think a realistic trade might look like?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be anything significant. I mean, if you're adding him in Ottawa, you're not moving, some of the names that are there, Tim Stützle, Brady Tkachuk, Drake Batherson, Dylan Cousins, Shane Pinto. None of those guys are going back. So it's not like you're adding him because you think he's the guy that's going to, be the star on your team. You're adding him because he's a really solid complementary player who's excellent on a power play, right? So that's why Ottawa would be looking at this. He's additional scoring. I think his 19 of his 23 goals last season were on the power play. So he's a big boost there. The thing with me for DeBrusk is that he's got a full no move this season. So he's got a modified 15 team, no trade list next year, but it's no move this year. And I don't know that Ottawa, although they are a better team and they are a playoff team who just needs maybe a couple extra pieces to start to make a push, maybe he's not on their radar. I don't know. Like it'd be hard to know whether or not he's a team that, or they're a team that he sees as a really good fit for him and he'd like to go there. There's been a lot of talk for a while here in Edmonton about Jake DeBrusk, right? So you talk about playing with star players and really doing well. Edmonton would be a good fit for him. His salary is great, so I think a ton of teams would be interested in him. At $5.5 million for a guy who's got like 51 goals over the last 2 years, why would you not look at that, right? And he's locked in, so he's an attractive piece for a lot of players or a lot of teams. Vancouver is probably going to try to move on, but he's going to have a lot of say in where he goes with this. So if they're waiting until next year when that trade flexibility opens up, that's one thing. But if they're trying to do it this summer, it's a matter of one or two teams, and whether Ottawa's on it, I don't know. But yeah, I heard they're interested for sure.
Well, speaking of players who could be on the move here shortly, we've got breaking news as we speak, actually, that Darnell Nurse has officially requested a trade out of Edmonton, per Elliot Friedman. Last week, it was reported that the Oilers would like to move him prior to the season getting underway, but he, of course, did have control over the situation because of his no movement clause. So that is going to change next offseason. His contract would change, or is going to change, to a 10-team no trade list. So now, the Oilers have essentially given him an ultimatum saying, help us facilitate a trade this summer, or be traded no matter what happens next summer. So obviously he has chosen to go with the former, it seems, helping to facilitate a trade. Obviously, we don't know any details right now about if he's requested to be traded to a certain team, a certain market. But I mean, Jim, covering him in Edmonton, I mean, I feel like his name has been coming up in trade rumors for years now at this point, and now it's got a little bit more finality to it. So looking at potential fits, not just for him, but who would have the kind of assets to get a trade done that Edmonton would be interested in. What would make sense for a trade for him this summer?
Sure. Well, on one hand, this surprises me, and on another, it doesn't really. Darnell Nurse, the surprise part of this is that he was part of that core group. McDavid, Draisaitl, Zach Hyman, Evan Bouchard now. They all wanted to win together. So this was a team that was trying to keep all those pieces in place. So that surprises me a little bit that he would request a trade. What doesn't really surprise me is that I don't think he's been terribly happy over the past couple of years. Every time we talk to him and when we're in that locker room, he seems like he's frustrated. Like he's maybe the guy who is a scapegoat for a lot of the problems that have happened in Edmonton over the last little bit. And I think he has sort of let that out in some of his interviews, and you can tell by his body language and his attitude that he just is probably tired of it. So the part of this that really changes the equation for me is that if he wants out, I think McDavid, Draisaitl, and those other guys are probably good to go, you know what, let's let him do what he wants to do. And if that's something that he's comfortable with, that changes our mentality about trading him. So the fact that that is now a request on his part changes everything, because The Oilers are not going to be upset that he wants to go. And I don't think McDavid and Draisaitl are going to be upset anymore that maybe he wants a fresh start. So as for teams that are going to be interested in him, I mean, San Jose has been linked to them for quite some time. I heard the other day that Philadelphia Flyers are dancing around this a little bit to see if there's a possibility there. I don't know how serious those conversations are, but if he's got 3 to 5 teams on his list, one, I would suggest he's probably looking at an opportunity to play maybe a smaller market where it's not so much that he's kind of the guy everybody's watching, and that contract of his $9.25 million is not viewed as, the albatross that it is viewed as in Edmonton here. So I don't know what all 3-5 teams would be on there. Contenders are probably in play here. Whether Toronto wants to mix it up and go with something different on their blue line, which we've heard. I'm not sure how much appealing Toronto would be to him, considering the market he's leaving in Edmonton if he is moved. But I think this request changes a lot of the narrative here. So I won't be shocked if it happens this summer.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, if you look at the situation, for me at least, Mike, I don't know about you, but I would think that if a team had given me the ultimatum that Edmonton gave Darnell Nurse, I would probably like to take that situation into my own hands, at least somewhat, and say, because otherwise you're sort of a dead man walking, right? Coming into this season, knowing that no matter what, you're getting traded next year. So now that this request on his part appears to be official, I mean, are you surprised by it? And how do you see this ending for both sides?
I'm surprised that it's gotten to him requesting a trade. It's sort of like, I'm thinking about breaking up with you. No, I'm going to break up with you first. It's like one of those situations. If you don't want me, then I'm gone. I agree with Jim. San Jose makes a lot of sense, especially since they have one veteran defenseman signed next year, and then they have Sam Dickinson. And they have $40 million in cap space. But I don't know how willing they are to spend 25% of that cap space on one player. I mean, I would think Stan Bowman in any transaction here is either going to have to take back a salary or retain salary. And he's got significant term left. So I'm sure there are teams interested. I don't know about the Toronto thing because it would probably have to involve Morgan Rielly. Morgan Rielly, I do not think is going to waive to go to Edmonton, especially if Mike Babcock is going to be the coach. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And he's an Ontario kid, but if you're talking about being in the crucible of hockey controversy, the center of the hockey universe, that's Toronto. So if he's looking to go to a smaller market, I think San Jose makes a lot of sense, and there are a couple others as well. He's not a bad defenseman. He's just not a $9.25 million defenseman, and that contract is onerous, and that's why it's going to be a tough move for Stan Bowman, but he's going to have to make it.
I think it'll be interesting too when you look at its 3 to 5 teams, kind of like Dylan Larkin. They turned around and asked him to expand his list. I think they're going to have to do that with Darnell Nurse, because I don't imagine there's enough hockey teams that 3 or 5 are going to make this move possible. He's probably going to have to expand that at least to double digits for them to really get the chance to shop him around.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point about with Dylan Larkin too. We talked about him earlier in the week. Lots of big names could be on the move here this summer. Jim, you talked about the albatross that is his contract, Darnell Nurse's contract in Edmonton, and Mike, you mentioned it too about how onerous that's going to be to move. The Boston Bruins, I think, are dealing with not quite as large of a contract, but similar sort of situation with Elias Lindholm. So they signed him to a 7-year, $54 million contract ahead of the 24-25 season. And as of now, they seem to be kind of losing on that investment. Lindholm has put up 47 and 48 points respectively over the last 2 seasons. He lost his top line center role to Pavel Zacha. Even Fraser Minton had some opportunities over him on the top 6 some nights this past season. So Mike, do you think the Bruins need to rework their center depth entirely? Knowing, because I know that you've talked about Minton before as he's not necessarily a 1C, but he was kind of forced into that role with this sort of losing investment on Lindholm. Do you think that he'll potentially be someone that the Bruins might want to move on from?
He could, but a $7.75 million cap hit with the cap going up, I mean, it's not great bang for the buck, but it's not terrible. And you look at their situation. I don't think you can force Fraser Minton it's sort of square peg in a round hole. I think he's a good young player. I think he's probably grades out as a third line center, and probably a third line center that can score 15 to 20 goals, but he's not a top 6 forward. Lindholm has had experience at that role. He just hasn't really found a fit there, and maybe there's some frustration on the part of Don Sweeney. You know, you have Zacha as your number one. I think they want more bang for the buck again in terms of offense out of their second line center. You know, and maybe if they trade him, maybe if there's any truth to the rumors about Vincent Trocheck being traded from the Rangers, you know, that might be a guy who would probably better fit sort of the ethic of the Bruins. But I don't think you're going to get a Lindholm for Trocheck type of deal. I think, you know, Boston is going to have to maybe, you know, Marco Sturm's going to have to maybe change things around a little bit, because he's a good player. You expected about 60 points out of him and not in the high 40s.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about teams needing center depth, I mean, get in line. Who doesn't need center depth right now? So if you have one, sometimes the devil you do know better than the one you don't. But Jim, when you look at Boston's center depth in general, you look at this contract for Lindholm, do you think that it is or even should be a priority for the Bruins to kind of rework their center depth around him, or do you think that, you know, he stays put?
I'm going to guess he stays put, only because he's got a no move until 2029. This is a player who was probably very fortunate to get the contract that he got with a full no move. He's a good player, but he's probably not in that elite center conversation by a long stretch. So Boston giving him that kind of a contract at 31, I think 32, he's going to be with that kind of, you know, control over his situation. I don't know why he would want to waive to go anywhere, unless it's like this Darnell Nurse situation where they're like, look, we don't really want you. We're looking at other options. What do you want to do here? I don't know if it's gotten to that point yet, but it could be one of those things that is a conversation down the road here. For me, though, Boston does need to improve that center depth. I think they're just going to have to figure out how to do it with him on the books. I can't imagine that there's going to be an easy trade there to make, and that teams are going to be lining up to make it. His contract's pretty heavy, and he's got a lot of control there. So, yeah, I'd look for Boston to try to get creative, whether like it's a Mason McTavish or somebody out of Anaheim could be on their radar. But I do think you're going to probably have to figure out how to do this with Elias Lindholm on your roster.
All right. Well, earlier in the week, Mike, we had talked about the Islanders and the chatter going on with Anders Lee, with him, you know, becoming a free agent here. So outside of that, though, in terms of whether or not he's going to head to free agency or come back to the Islanders, not a lot has been discussed as far as what the Islanders are going to plan to do this summer, what they should plan to do this summer. Because remember, this is a team that acquired Braden Shen at the trade deadline, and they still ended up 8 points out of a playoff spot this year. So outside of Anders Lee, the Islanders have 5 pending free agents and just over $11 million in cap space. So really not a lot to work with here. Mike, where do you see Matthew Darche taking this team next season, you know, with the assets that he has, and what do you think should be the priority for this team to add?
Well, it's funny because the same thing that I've said for 5 years when Lou Lamoriello was the general manager and with the Islanders, you know, Matthew Darche comes in and you would think that he'd recognize, well, this team needs to score more. They've been good defensively for the most part over the last 5 or 6 years, but they just don't have enough offense. And what does he do? He goes out and signs a two-way or trades for a two-way center in Braden Shen and trades for an aging Andre Palat. It didn't make a lot of sense. And now you're starting to hear rumors about Matthew Barzal maybe wanting out, or them possibly shipping him out. I mean, that's sort of counterproductive to what I think they should be doing. They should be looking for offense. And I don't think, you know, it may be too unreasonable to think that Cole Eiserman, their first round pick from a couple years ago, can step into the lineup. He played, I think, 12 games in the American Hockey League. He may not be ready, but that's the direction they need to get younger and faster and get more offense. And the moves that Darche made last year went completely in the other direction. If it wasn't for Matthew Schaefer, this team would be a basket case.
Yeah, not how the Islanders were expecting things to go here, I don't think, with the moves that they did make at the deadline. Jim, do you agree that offense should be their priority to add this summer?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if they don't, I think whether the Barzal situation becomes a real storyline here, I think that's going to dictate pretty much everything that they do. Now, there's always going to be some players that look at Matthew Schaefer and go, hey, that'd be a nice place to go. This kid's really something. But yeah, I think they need to get scoring. Anders Lee is the biggest name of their 5 free agents. Let's be honest about that. When you've got 3 guys like Carson Soucy, Adam Boquist, Tony DeAngelo, and then David Riddick are the other 4, those are not difference makers that you have to worry about keeping around. This is not like, oh my gosh, we're going to lose all of these guys. The biggest guy they could lose is Anders Lee, and even him as a depth piece, an aging veteran, he's not going to be the kind of person that everybody's lining up to sign. So I don't think that the number of free agents that the Islanders have is a huge concern. I don't think the pieces that they're about to lose is a massive concern, but they do need to add. If they're going to bring in a guy like Braden Shen and they're able to keep a guy like Matthew Barzal and they have a guy like Matthew Schaefer on the roster, there are some pieces here that they could build upon, and they need to figure out a way to spend the money that they're about to give away or let leave in a proper, productive way. I don't think if they do anything this summer, that's good enough for them. I don't think they're a strong enough team to not really do anything. And if they do the wrong thing, like maybe adding Braden Shen was potentially the wrong move, then it's going to be a big step backwards for them. So they got to be really smart about what they do this summer. Let those guys leave. They're not difference makers. Even Anders Lee, it'd be nice to keep him around because it's kind of the only situation he's ever been in is the Islanders. But just spend the money wisely. If you're going to do that and you're the Islanders, you have a shot at this. But if you don't, I think you're probably taking a lot of steps backwards, and maybe it's a couple more years before we're talking about a rebuild here.
Well, Mike, we talk a lot on the show about Alex Tuch and his free agency this summer and how he's probably going to get paid handsomely wherever he goes. And there's been a lot of talk. I know you've been saying for months that you think that he is out of Buffalo, and that could still very well be the case. We know that now, according to Elliot Friedman, there's still a gap in negotiations between Alex Tuch and the Sabres in terms of a potential extension. So, we've talked a lot about how Tuch's free agency is going to play out if he does go to the market, and where he's going to end up, if it's Buffalo, if it's somewhere else. But I want to kind of look back at the other side of this. So if Tuch does leave in free agency, as you predict that he will, how do you think the Sabres should pivot if he does end up moving on? I mean, are there specific trade targets, maybe not even specific players, but specific positions that you would prioritize? And how much worse off do you think the Sabres are without him? What are they going to need to add to sort of make up for that gap?
Well, I mean, first, like you said, I've been saying since September, based on the reports that came out that he was gone. Not because I think he would want to stay in Buffalo if they would pay him, but he's going to be the highest paid free agent in this market. He's probably going to get over $10 million a year. He's 30 years old. I understand the reservations of the Sabres paying a 30-year-old that kind of money. But he's going to get that somewhere with the cap going up. So how do they pivot? Well, I think, Jarmo Kekalainen sort of signaled at what they want to do. I think they want to sign Zach Benson long-term. And I think, based on the way he played in the playoffs, that's a smart move. It's a 21-year-old kid who's got 3 years of NHL experience already. I think they're interested in paying Bowen Byram when he becomes eligible for an extension on July 1st, but that's going to be very costly. His agent is Darren Ferris. He likes to take his players to market. So, I think it'd probably end up costing them more than what Owen Power is making. And how much money do you want to allocate to your defense? So those are factors here. Free agency wise, and this is just my theory, I'm just speculating here. I think they'll want to fill sort of the veteran leadership gap left by Tuch leaving, and a guy who is probably hitting the market, who Jarmo Kekalainen knows very well, is Boone Jenner of the Columbus Blue Jackets. He's not Tuch. He's older than Tuch. He doesn't play as much. He's not as durable as Tuch, but he is a leader, and Kekalainen knows him. He brought Justin Danforth, who was a fourth liner, depth forward from Columbus here last year, and he got hurt early in the year. But you can't deny the connections between Columbus and Kekalainen since he was there for so long. So if they do lose Tuch, which I think is very possible, I think a guy like Boone Jenner, if he hits the open market, Buffalo will be in on him.
Jim, want to wrap up quickly here since we have you. And you mentioned before the show that it seems like, even though we've talked about Mike Babcock now 3 days in a row here, it doesn't matter because it seems like every 5 minutes there's more news with him. So you're in Edmonton, you cover the Oilers, just kind of want to get your take on the whole Mike Babcock situation with everything that's going on right now.
Yeah, it's a never-ending. It's a gift that keeps on giving if you're writing content for the Edmonton Oilers, because it is a constant changing storyline every 5 to 10 minutes. The Babcock situation is really interesting, and I believe this is maybe going to go in a direction that a lot of people don't see coming. The fact that Edmonton decided, and they are stubborn. The Edmonton Oilers are a stubborn team who, when they want something, they go after it, regardless of what the optics are, and that's why they're going after Babcock in the first place. What we've heard is that there was a conversation where Connor McDavid, Draisaitl, Hyman is a big advocate for Mike Babcock, have really pushed for this. They had a conversation with Mike Babcock and they grilled him on a lot of stuff. And they walked away from that conversation saying, this is our guy, which I think is the reason that they're not waiting on a guy like Bruce Cassidy, who maybe Vegas has said you're never going to get to talk to, but I don't believe that's actually been definitively stated. I think Edmonton could have waited another 2 weeks and probably got the chance to talk to Cassidy, but they don't want to do that anymore. They've decided that Babcock is their guy. What I find is really interesting about this is the investigation that the NHL is now conducting. I think there's something there. I think there's more to it than the cell phone situation. I think there's something that he walked away from the Columbus Blue Jackets in 2023 because whatever it was wasn't good. And he didn't want that out there. So I'm shocked that Babcock is willing to go through that process right now. So to me, I think if there's any inclination or any indication that something nasty is going to come out, I think it's Babcock who walks away. I think he's going to be the guy who says, you know what, I don't want this or need this out there. And if they're going to do that and find that and discover that, and I believe there are some players from Columbus and some other players in the past too that have some interesting testimonials to share that the NHLPA wants out there, I don't know why Babcock, who has tons of money and was happily retired, is going to want to go through that and drag this out. I think the Oilers probably would be like, hey, maybe we'll see. I don't know what conversations happened there and whether or not he was totally honest about his past with the Oilers and that leadership group. But I do wonder if there's something really nasty there, if it's Babcock who walks away from this, because why would you need that out there? He doesn't need this job. And especially if it's like a 1-year deal, which I can't imagine be any more than that. Why do you drag yourself through that? Why, unless he's just that stubborn, but like, why do you want that out there in public? Like, don't just, you walked away from it once, you hid from whatever it was the first time. Why would you want it out there now? So I do wonder, depending on what stories are coming out here, if he's the one who walks away from this.
Jim, I have two words. He is that egomaniacal. He is that strong-headed. And I've got 5 words for you, Emma. Craig Berube, come on down.
Yeah, like Jim said, never a dull moment covering the Oilers this summer. Of course, if you want to read any more about the Mike Babcock saga, about any of the topics or players or rumors that we've talked about here today, head over to the Hockey News. It has been the go-to for all things hockey since 1947. 12 issues packed with game and player insights, plus a free issue to start. It's a must-have for any fan. Head to thn.com/free and grab your subscription today. That's going to do it for today's episode of The Wraparound. Thank you so much for joining us, listening to us talking some hockey today. We really do appreciate it. We'll be back with an all new episode next week. But for now, for Michael Agello and Jim Parsons, I'm Emma Lingen. This is The Wraparound, and we will see you next time.